up to this year's 31 on 31, I binged through the Exorcist franchise, and that's a set of films that 4 of them I had never seen before, and I've never talked about any of them on my channel before, so today we're going to stop and rank all 5 Exorcist films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know your ranking of all 5 films in the Exorcist franchise. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, remember, the reason that I watch these movies and I'm doing this video is because coming up this Sunday is this year's 31 on 31. That's 31 horror movies all ranked together. This year, it's Unholy Terrors. We're talking about haunted houses, possession, and exorcisms, hence the Exorcist franchise. And the reason I'm doing some of these separate rankings like this is because in a 31 on 31, I can only talk about the movies for like 1 minute or 2 minutes, something like that, and the video's still really long. So I wanted a place where I could just put all my thoughts on there for those people that want to go in depth on some of these ones. So with that said, let's get started. In last place, The Exorcist II, The Heretic. This is a movie where there is simply no excuses for how bad this movie turned out. The director for it, just a few years earlier, had gotten a bunch of Oscar nominations and wins for directing Deliverance. They got most of the cast back. They had plenty of resources for the budget, and they just went in the weirdest, strangest possible direction with just a terrible premise about a device that makes it so people's brains can sync. And so the girl from the first movie syncs brains with a priest who experiences Father Marin's exorcism in the past and starts I don't even know what I'm saying right now. I mean, it's just such a bizarre, wacky, strange concept executed in this dull fashion where you just have people in a lab with headgears on, doing close-ups of their faces with trippy images of fields, and I don't know what was going on, and there's locusts flying around everywhere. Wow. Legitimately, I watched it yesterday, or 2 days ago, and I'm not sure if I could explain what was going on besides what I just said right here, because it's just such a movie that totally misreads what people liked about the original one, and it just feels like someone desperately trying to continue the story without having any idea where to go with it. And the idea of technology that syncs your brain with someone else might be a good premise for an entire sci-fi film. It's just like a throwaway plot device in an Exorcist movie. It's just a terrible and stupid idea. So this one comes in last place because it was a bad idea executed poorly, and there is no excuses for making a movie this bad with this kind of talent involved. In 4th place, Exorcist Beginning. Now, this is an interesting one because the backstory on this movie is that originally someone else set out to make this movie, shot the full movie, it was Paul Schrader, and the studio decided, we want someone else to come in and do some rewrites, and somehow Rennie Harlin, the director of Cliffhanger and Die Hard 2, was like, yeah, I'm going to reshoot everything. And so they recast everyone except the lead actor, kept the basic one-sentence premise of the film, and reshot all of it. And that's what this is. And right off the bat, the movie seems like it just doesn't understand what made Exorcist interesting and appealing in the first place. And so you just have this movie that takes us from normal neighborhood into this exotic location in the past. And all of a sudden, instead of being about a girl that's pulled through this horrible ordeal, we're not quite sure who is possessed, and anyway you kind of do it, it just feels detached. It feels like a totally different genre. The environment's not quite as interesting, and the plot just has way too much going on with all these different competing factions in the areas. It leads to some big action set pieces taking place while there's an exorcism happening somewhere else. Hyenas eat someone at one point in time. There's just so much going on that it just loses whatever we're supposed to be locked in on. And it's a movie that the Rennie Harlin was a great 90s action movie director, but a big part of that was his lack of subtlety. He just did these in-your-face action sequences that were cool to look at. And I just don't know that that's the right guy to tackle this. A story about a priest who's lost his faith and realizes he knows he needs to do an exorcism but doesn't believe in exorcisms, and the guy that directed Cliffhanger doesn't seem like a fit at all, and you see that in this movie where there's like this overabundance of like shocking gore, action sequences in a movie that's supposed to be like a character-based story about an exorcism. So it's just like a movie competing with itself, because that's essentially what it is, that this guy came in to do reshoots and then turned it into something else, and I don't think he would have gone with this story if he were just hired from the beginning. So I don't think it really worked. And then riding along those same lines, Dominion, the prequel to The Exorcist, the other movie that was made, where the writer of Taxi Driver was brought in to direct this movie, but not to write it. He shot the script, turned it into the studio, and they didn't like it, and then had Rennie Harlan make his own movie with the same premise and lead actor. And then when that wasn't well received, they're like, all right, let's put out the Taxi Driver guy's movie too. And so they put out his movie, and it was better received, but made a lot less money. And now we have it. I still think at its core, this just wasn't a good premise for a movie that's very interesting to very many people. It's not the right direction to go with the Exorcist franchise. Taking a side character and like, let's really dig in deep on Father Merrin and what was he doing right after World War II? What was it? Where did all this archaeology stuff start from? What was that first exorcism? I just don't think... I think the mystery and the intrigue of what we learned from the first movie is a lot more captivating than the answers given in either version of these films. And I don't think the environment suits the genre. It feels like it should be like an Indiana Jones movie, because this is the sort of archaeology stuff that happened in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It just feels like a lot of an awfully talky film for where we're at and what's taking place. But I'd say that this is the better version of it. I think it understands the character study and kicks off with the events that happened during World War II, making it clear to us why he's having this crisis of faith that makes for a much stronger arc because we saw that. And that's the through line of it, those horrible things that he observed and his reclaiming his faith through this other journey. It's a lot more profound here. Still a pretty dull film for me. The third act got pretty ridiculous, but the better version of a faulty premise. Our runner-up, The Exorcist III. Now, this is an interesting one, because I had all kind of feelings about this one as I was watching it, and then I watched some behind-the-scenes features about the behind-the-scenes story, what happened with this movie, and how it was reworked and changed from the original premise, with reshoots, with a new ending, and certain changes with characters and things like that. And it made me even more conflicted as to my feelings about this movie. In general, I really dug a lot of this film, and it kicks off, and you just see the friendship between this father and this police detective, and it felt like such a real, authentic friendship between two guys that had a long history, that had realistic banter between the two of them, that you believed that they cared about each other and had a history and had great chemistry between the two actors. And it was just really good dialogue, the way that it was written and how real that it felt while still being entertaining, which is tricky to have entertaining dialogue that rings true in real life. And then as the events of the story start to take place and they start digging into the investigation, I was tracking along with all of it. As you move into the second half of the story and they bring back the guy from the first movie and Brad Dourif's there, it's a great performance. I just wasn't as crazy about where the story went from there. And then with the answers about Gemini and this guy and what exactly was happening. And then as it kind of moved towards the actual exorcism that takes place in the third act, something just kind of felt a little bit forced. And it didn't seem like that's where the first movie was building towards. And so I rang a little bit hollow. So it was a movie that I thought worked better in the first half than the second. So that's where I watched the sort of behind the scenes on what ended up happening. Apparently a lot of it was from the studio that wanted more horror. They wanted more ties to The Exorcist. They added the exorcism in later on. They added in some gore later on and changed kind of the focus to all that stuff. That's what I didn't like about the movie as much. It was interesting that I wrote my thoughts down, like, I don't know, that exorcism stuff didn't seem like it fit all that well. And then, it turns out that was a bunch of reshoots. Apparently there is this alternative version out there. I just didn't have time to watch it. And they tried to reconstruct it as best they could in the last few years. I would be interested to check that out to see if that one kind of works a little bit better for me when it sticks to the original premises and is closer to the original writer and director's vision for the film. So I'd like to check that out. But as is a movie that I had a lot of things I dug about it. I was tracking along with many of the elements, and I think it petered out a little bit as it went along. But of course, in first place, the original, The Exorcist, the film that has been, for now almost 50 years, been declared the scariest movie ever made. The movie that defines this entire genre, that has led to a bazillion ripoffs, a bazillion spoofs, that's filled with just classic imagery that set the template for how you do one of these movies. And rewatching it, I mean, it holds up very well. Certainly, it has a different pacing from modern horror films. It's a slow burn that takes its time to set up the normal. So you get to know the characters before things are crazy. See the different elements that are going to build towards something. And you start to see things getting with a little bit weird with the little girl. And then gets violently strange and peculiar till by the time you get to the third act, and it is just wild, crazy insanity. And it's so much of what makes this movie to this day so shocking is that, first off, it's just, by any standards, very ballsy what they do with this girl. Because there's plenty of movies that have scary images and blood and gore and bending contortion type stuff taking place. They have like this little girl saying horrible things, using a cross for some unpleasant things to watch, saying things to grown men that are very unsettling, and the movie goes for it with all this stuff that many movies have tried to kind of copy it, but they all seem like they sand off the edges, and this movie just puts it out there. And the other reason that it works is because of that slow burn. And because it feels like such a normal little girl in a relatively normal little suburb, that this could happen to anyone. And so you watch normal kid turn into kid that's doing unsettling things and peeing at a party on the floor and then yelling out obscenities, and then from there becoming violent and then clearly turning into some sort of demon creature. It's horrifying to watch because it's so grounded at the beginning. And add to that, you just have a great set of supporting characters that have just the right amount of an arc where you have someone that's losing their faith, and the thing that brings them back to belief in good is seeing something so evil. And you have all these kind of different characters that just balance out the story where they have a reasonable amount of doubt, and they're not someone that immediately believes it, but there's no way to deny what they're seeing right in front of themselves. So this is one of those movies that, of course, if you're into movies, you have to watch this movie. Of course, if you're a horror fan, you've already seen this film many times before, and 50 years later, it is still the standard by which you judge these movies, and still one of the best of this genre. So, of course, it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, remember to check out the rest of my horror rankings right over there in that playlist. Also, remember to come back, I guess, tomorrow to check out 31 on 31, where I'm going to rank 31 horror movies about possession, movies just like this one. All together, you can see which one I picked to be number 1 and which one is the absolute worst. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies to